Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you how you can make your very own summoning spell using the template that I created on Nexus Mods. Now, to do this, then first of all you need to read through all the description and everything that's already listed on the site. It'd be useful to watch the intro video just so you know what you're getting into. And so we can begin. The first thing is that you want to download it, make sure it's the most recent version. Manual download, slow download is fine, it's not a very big file. Now, once you have this, then, because it's a copy, then... Okay, so once you have the file, then just extract it. And then make sure these two are here. These are the two files you need to be able to complete this, nothing else. Unless you want to make your item modded, if you want to summon like a lightsaber or some modded item or weapon, then you're going to have to go into that file and source the ID. More about that later. Now, if you want to move this file to another place, which I want to do, then just copy this and place it into here. Because it's already here, I don't need to do that. Right here, spell template, make sure these two are here. And so now we can get on to the fun part. Okay, so once you have it all downloaded, then you're going to have to set up all your IDs. If you have a bad memory, then I would recommend adding in a text file to keep track of everything, which I'm going to do for the sake of just visual representation. And so what this will do is make your spell completely custom so that it works with every other spell out there and that has been released and will be released if you do it right. If you mess this up, then it either will break completely or it won't be compatible with other spells. So there's going to be 3 distinct IDs you're going to be using throughout the entire mod. That's ID 1, ID 2, and the weapon ID. Or it can be the item ID. Whichever you chose, you can either spawn a weapon, an item, an object, whatever you would like to call it, then that's the ID we're going to be using. So, for the first ID, then you need to make it something specific to your mod and something that no one else will use. If somebody else uses it, then it will override your mod and it won't work at all. So let's just figure out what mod we're making today. So I'm just going to say I'm going to be making a rapier spell, which is the exotic sword that's in the base game. So ID 1 would be rapier spell. Nothing complicated, just so you can remember it, pretty much. And so for the first ID, then you just want to keep it like that. For the second one, then you want to change it up slightly, but not so much that you'll forget it. So, for instance, ID number 2 could be Spell Rapier. Just so we can remember it, but it's different enough that it won't really impact it. The weapon ID is the next part of this tutorial that we're going to be talking about, which, let's get into it. Now, here comes the fun part of making all this. Now we want to find the object, weapon, or item that we want to spawn in. So, you'll notice we have a base.jsondb file that I've included inside the mod. Do not extract this, and make sure not to include this in the game. This is just to extract the ID. So go ahead and open this. Go to items. Nothing else will work. Trust me, I've tried. Now, since it's in the weapons category, then we scroll all the way down. And it will be the rapier. So item, weapon, rapier. Now, you might just think that this is the ID, item, weapon, rapier. This isn't. You have to open the file, and then on the third line of code, you'll see ID, rapier. This right here is what we want. So let's just copy, and then put it directly into our ID. So now we know exactly what we want to spawn in, and we can move on to all of the coding. Let's move on to that now. Okay, so imagine that you want to spawn in a modded weapon, like let's just say the Master Sword from The Legend of Zelda, which a mod recently released a couple days ago, I believe, that allowed you to spawn in that weapon just from the spell book or the item book. But if you want to make this into a spell, then you're going to have to do this yourself. So what you want to do is go into the mod that it came in, which would be the Master Sword, if I can find it. Just give me a second. This might take a little bit. Okay, Master Sword. There it is. Okay, most of these look the same, so you're going to go to Item and then whatever it says after that. All that matters is that it says Item. And so this is going to be the ID that you want to use if you are going to be modding it with a modded weapon instead of just the base game's weapons. It's pretty much the same process after this. This is recorded post-modding, so I already know that the Rapier spell works, and if you just drag and drop this into that spell, it'll pretty much just replace the item, and that's it. So once you have this ID, then just repeat all the steps that you see after this, except with the modded ID that you want. And just a notice before I move on to the next section. For the mods and modded item spells, then you're going to need to make sure you have this mod installed. If you have the Master Sword as a spell mod, but you don't have the Master Sword mod downloaded, it won't do anything, because it's calling on something that doesn't exist. If you intend to upload this to any mod websites like Nexus Mods or anywhere else, make sure that you ask the creator of the mod if you can use their material. I know this is redundant because it's an open source website and everything is publicly available, but one of my friends got his mod taken down for using the throwing knives mod from another user, which apparently had no right of being used. So just make sure that you ask permission first. That's all the warning I'm going to give you, and just have fun making modded stuff. Now on to the next section for importing. Okay, so since we've already extracted all of our IDs and we know exactly what we need for this app or mod, then we can go ahead and start changing the code. These three are the main files you need to change, so just open them, and then inside you'll see this. On the effects, then we have 5 to change, but that'll be in a completely separate section. So, first of all, open containers, player default. So, this right here would be ID1, which, if we go to our reference, is Rapier spell. So, if you have trouble remembering things, like me, then you can just copy it directly from here. Copy and paste. Now we're done with that. Make sure to save instead of save as. If you press save as, then it'll pull up a window to make you save to a certain file. We don't want that. We don't want to make it more complicated than it is. So, once you have this done, then just make sure and check that it's the correct ID that you've chosen. Now we can move on to the second one, damagers. For this one, then it says spell name ID 2. This one is slightly different. This would be the second ID that we've chosen, which is spell rapier. Completely different from this one. So, just copy, and paste. Make sure that the parentheses are not in this code, or you might screw something up. Make sure to save, and then we can move on to the next things. I'm leaving the effects for a completely separate section, just because there's a lot to go through and it's a lot more complicated. So now that we've got those two basics, then this will get you ready for the next sections. Let's go. So now that we've finished all the basics, let's move on to effects. These are slightly different from the other ones because there is very little that you need to change, but it's very specific. In the first one, then it's just as simple as the containers. So let's just make sure that we can remember what that is. Spellname ID, which would be spellname ID1. Make sure it's all there. And paste. Also, make sure that these quotations are still in place because that calls it in as a variable instead of it just being a line of code. So let's save and move on to the next one. Now, the rest of these are going to be a lot different from the last ones because you have to keep certain sections of it still there. This is spellname ID, so it would be the first ID, again with rapier spell. Copy. Now, we want to keep the charge element. So it would become spell rapier charge. If this isn't here, then it'll mess things up and you won't get the right mod that you want. Once this is complete, just save it, move on to the next one. Same thing with this. Spellname ID, which would be ID number 1. Paste that into there, and then save. And this third one is the last one you need to worry about in this section at least, with ID number 1. Save it, and there's this last one. In the spell or modded section, then it's going to be spellname ID 2, which would be your second ID that you chose, which for me, it would be spell rapier. Make sure to copy that. And keep spell orb intact so that it actually works. It should become, for me at least, spell orb spell rapier. This is a little bit confusing, but with time, then you'll be able to figure it out. Okay, so since we're done with this section, then we can move on to the much more complicated item and spells categories. So now we're going to move on to the items section, which is the least complicated of the two. So just go ahead and open it up. It should look exactly like this. There's really only 3 parts you need to change, which is just the normal ID 1 and 2. So go ahead and pull up your reference. Copy this. Import in spellname ID 1. This right here, you don't need to put in. This has to do with the name of the item when the new game mode comes out in 2022, the Crystal Hunt, where you can purchase weapons and spells for your character. You don't need to worry about this until the update, but you can put in whatever you want until then. So I'm just going to put in spell or rapier spell, just so that when it does come out, then you'll have something to look at. You can also make it purchasable, the price, the tier, level acquired, stackable. You can edit all these things, but I'm not going to put it in this video until the Crystal Hunt game mode actually releases. Right now we're just focusing on the actual mod itself. Now, this is another one where you have to keep this part intact. So Just paste the second ID. It should say spell orb, spell rapier, in my case. And same thing for the second one. You have to paste in the second ID, so spell rapier. And this is pretty much it for the item section. Just go ahead and save, X out of that, and you're ready to move on to the pretty much the final section if you just want bare bones spell. But if you want to also make a certain profile for your spell, for usernames and such, then I'll also have that section at the very end of the video. So let's move on. And so now we're ready to move on to spells. This is the section that allows you to actually spawn in the weapon, add all the details for all the effects, and if you want to, then you can detail all of the specifics of it, like the animations, the charge speed, everything that has to do with the actual spell itself, you can change. But there's a downside. This part has a lot of code to fill in. So I'm just going to input all of this, and you can pretty much watch, and I'll explain every now and then. But based on the sections before, you might have a pretty good idea of what I do. Okay, so this section right here, these two lines of code, this is the fun part. This is where you get to put in the weapon, item, object ID that you pulled in the very first sections. So this will allow you to actually spawn in the item into your game just using the spell. Right here, just copy that ID and paste. Same thing for this. Paste. Make sure that everything's good. And now that part's over, so you pretty much don't even need this section anymore. Now all I need to do is just import all the rest of these, which I believe there are only 4 more of these IDs I need to edit, and then I can tell you all the specifics and what to look for, all the debugging that you need to do, just to make sure that everything's working. So let me just input these, and I'll be right back. Just make sure to scroll down on all of these sections just to make sure that there's no lines of code that you still need to edit. There's been a couple of times where I thought I edited everything, but there was one little section that I didn't change and it broke everything. This is the most important section. If you make any mistakes, then it could ruin the entire spell, and you might have to start from scratch. So just be very, very aware of that. And so once you're done with this little section, then you can go ahead and import the mod onto your headset and test it out. But what I would recommend is to go ahead and rename the spell into what you are going to be making. For instance, mine would be Rapier Spell. So now I know what this is going to be whenever I import it onto my headset. I already have a file named this, so I can't name it. But if I just name it, I guess not. Okay. Well, the point is, you need to name your file something that you will recognize, like kunai spell, experiment spell, this. In the next section, then I'll talk about debugging and the manifest, and also I'll show you some gameplay of the spell that I just created. Okay, so quickly before I get into this section, I figured out the problem with renaming it. You cannot rename a zipped file. Now, this is my bad because you do not want to download this to your game. So once you extract that item file, you can just go ahead and delete this, and then make this your main file. And just change this to whatever you need to name it. Okay, this is probably why. So yeah, just rename this, and then you can import into the game, and you can make sure that everything is good. Okay, so now for the debugging. If you have any problems with your game, with like it crashing or the spell not showing up in your wheel, the wheel only showing up on one axis, as in it stays in one position for some reason, it glitches out, your fingers are the only thing that glows, it doesn't actually spawn anything, 99% of the time, then it's one of two things. Either you named something wrong, or you edited something you were not supposed to. So just go back through all of your code and make sure that all of these IDs are in the correct places and look the exact same where they are supposed to. If they're different, then it could break something. So with that in mind, then just debug all your code, go through it. Even if you're confident, go through one more time just to make sure, because even professionals make mistakes, and if you're a beginner like me, then you'll definitely make a mistake from time to time. So now on to the gameplay. Let's test it out. I know I said I was going to show you some gameplay, but I need to show you this before I show you the gameplay, just so you don't mess this up. So when you import this into a brand new file, then you might have just opened this, and then you have to click through two files to get the actual code. Now, what you want is this, and only this. So make sure to just make this outside of the normal spell template file, so that it doesn't mess anything up. So once you have that copy, just go ahead and delete that. Make sure everything's still here. And this raw file is what you can import into your game. Now, how to import it into your game. Go to SideQuest or your PC, and in the Quest tab, in the Files, go to Android, wait a second, Data, scroll all the way down until you see com.warpflog.blade and sorcery. Open that, Files, and then finally Mods. Now, you might want to upload it through here. Don't. This only lets you upload one bit of information. What you have to do is make this a floating tab, and then drag and drop directly into there. First, just make sure that it's not already in your game, because you might have been testing it before, or you might already have a mod that's named the same thing. So once you confirm that, just drop it into the game. Wait for it to load. Or try again, I guess. Okay. So just check it to make sure it's actually in the mods folder. Rapier spell. It will show whatever your spell's name is. So, for instance, if you want to make a lightsaber spell and you named it spell lightsaber, then it'll show up somewhere in here. And so yeah, once you have this imported, then it should just be plug and play pretty much. Go ahead and unplug your headset and just boot up the game. A fair word of warning, whenever you update the mod and reinstall it onto your mods folder, by deleting it and then reinstalling the updated version, you're going to want to exit out of your game and then rejoin, because that reloads the mods folder and makes sure that they're all in game. If you don't do this, then it won't update and you'll have old mods to work with. I know it's a hassle, but there's no better way other than using the just default JSON file, which is extremely hard to configure, and I'm not going to deal with that. So bottom line, whenever you're messing around with the mod, then make sure to reinstall, or not reinstall, but restart your game every time you download another mod. So on to the gameplay. Okay, so if you've already gotten to the game and you're to this level of loading in, which means you're on the character select screen, then that means that at least you haven't screwed up things so bad the game won't work. Now, there's still a chance that the mod won't work, which this is my first time testing it, so I don't know if it'll work. I know just as much as you do from watching the video. So, I have multiple of the same looking mod, which these are all different, but trust me, they still look the same. Just test it out, see which one's which. That's my barrel mod. There it is, the rapier. With this, you can spawn in a rapier whenever you want to. It has full physics. It can do everything a normal one can. And just for reference, then let me show you the original one. The only difference is that this one doesn't have gravity. I'm still trying to figure out how to change this, but in the meantime, then that is the only difference between the original one and the spell version. So, if your spell works like this, then you can pretty much just finish, upload to Nexus by changing the file name and then doing all of that stuff. But if you want to go an extra bit farther, then you can change the manifest, and you can mess around with a couple different settings to change some of the variables, like the animation, for instance. I've changed it to where it's completely different animation than the normal one. So, for instance, I use the animation for holding a quiver. This is the animation for the spell. I wouldn't get into this if you're a beginner, but options. So we've confirmed that it works. Now to go back to the PC so I can show you how to configure the manifest if you want to. See you there. Okay, so at this point, you can just finish. You don't need to do anything else. You are done. You don't even need to remove the ID's text file if you made one. But if you want to make this an upload and you want people to source this and make other mods out of your mod, then just as a little imprint of yourself, then you can change the manifest. Now, this is pretty much just like a description of your mod and what it is. So just put in your mod name, which mine would be Rapier Spell. The description, which would just be whatever your mod does, which for me, then it would be spawns a rapier in your hand. The author, which would just be your username, or whatever you want it to be. You can be your real name, your username, your Oculus username. Now, for me, it would be Sparky over 250. Yes, I know on my Nexus page, it's SAPRKY. I accidentally made a spelling error, and it stuck like that, so if you ever text me and you see this, just refer to me as Sparky. I just like this more. The mod version, just kind of like whatever iteration of your mod it is, like how many tries it took you to make it, or what the version is of your update in case you want to upload it. So mine, it would be 1.0. And after you're done with this, you can just save, and you are completely ready to upload this to Nexus, send it to friends, or just do whatever you want with it. Now, I know I haven't covered exactly how to change the colors of the spell. I will be making a completely separate video on that whenever I do figure out how to do it. One of my friends knows how to do it, but I don't. It has to do with a lot of very, very complicated RGB values that can mess up everything very, very quickly. So when I do make that video, just make sure that you've messed with this a lot and you're confident in your coding abilities, because it will get very messy. But yeah, that's pretty much the end of the video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more modding content like this, Beat Saber content, pretty much anything VR related or gaming. Then like and subscribe. If you have any suggestions of what I should do next, then go ahead and comment in the description below. So yeah, see you later and happy modding.